Hi there. Welcome to Melted Stone, the spot for stories that grab you and won't let you go. If you love drama, surprises, and moments that make you say, no way, you're in the right place. Subscribe and dive into tales full of twists, bold moves, and endings you'll remember. This is Melted Stone. Hit the bell and let's get the story rolling.
Okay?
Think so. Think so. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you.
The tractor-trailer jackknifed across 3 lanes of black ice at 11:47 p.m., its cargo doors bursting open like a broken promise. Edwin Halperin watched it happen through his windshield, his pickup truck sliding to a stop 20 feet from the wreckage. Steam rose from the overturned cab in the freezing Pennsylvania air. He should have driven past. Should have called 911 and kept going. Instead, Edwin grabbed the crowbar from his truck bed and ran toward the accident. The driver was trapped, conscious but bleeding from his forehead. Edwin wedged the crowbar against the twisted door frame and pulled until metal screamed against metal. The door gave way with a violent crack. "You okay?" Edwin asked, helping the man out of the cab. "Think so," the driver gasped. "Thank you. Jesus, thank you." Edwin was turning to leave when he saw it. A silver laptop wedged between the passenger seat and dashboard. The Apple logo gleamed under his flashlight beam. He recognized the scratch pattern on the case immediately. It was Moira's. His wife's laptop, the one she claimed had been stolen from her car 3 days ago. The one she'd cried about losing, worried about her work files and personal photos. The one she'd reported to the police and her insurance company. Edwin looked at the injured driver who was now on his phone with emergency services. A business card had fallen from the laptop case onto the floor. Edwin picked it up. Gabriel Vettori, Director of Operations, Tri-State Logistics, Moira's boss. Edwin slipped both the laptop and business card into his jacket. When the paramedics arrived 15 minutes later, he was already gone. The house was dark when Edwin pulled into his driveway. Moira's Toyota sat in its usual spot, overnight frost beginning to form on the windshield. He sat in his truck for a moment, staring at the bedroom window where a faint glow suggested she was awake, probably watching Netflix on her tablet. Edwin carried the laptop into his workshop behind the house. The smell of motor oil and rust welcomed him like an old friend. He'd inherited this place from his father, 3 acres of salvage yard and a small office where he bought and sold scrap metal. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. He set the laptop on his workbench and stared at it. The lock screen showed 11:58 p.m. Moira's screensaver was a photo of their 11-year-old son, Toby, at his last baseball game. Edwin closed the laptop and walked to the house. Moira was in bed, her back to the door. Her breathing was too controlled, too measured. She was awake. "How was your night?" she asked without turning over. "Helped at an accident scene," Edwin said, undressing in the dark. "Semi-jackknifed on Route 22. "That's nice of you." Her voice was flat, distracted. Edwin slipped into bed beside her. "Moira? Hmm? Your laptop, the one that was stolen. Did you file a police report?" She tensed slightly. "Of course I did. Why?" "Just checking. Insurance might want documentation." "I handled it," she said. "Go to sleep, Edwin. I have an early meeting tomorrow." Edwin lay awake until 3 a.m., listening to his wife's fake sleep breathing. When he was certain she was actually asleep, he crept back to the workshop. The next morning, Edwin called his Aunt Sadie. Sadie Halperin was 58 years old and had spent 23 years as a private investigator before retiring to a small house outside Pittsburgh. She was the only person Edwin trusted completely, and more importantly, she knew how to crack passwords. "I need a favor," Edwin said when she answered. "What kind of favor?" Sadie's voice was cautious. She'd raised Edwin after his parents died in a car accident when he was 16, and she knew him well enough to sense trouble. "The kind where you don't ask too many questions." An hour later, Sadie arrived at the salvage yard in her beat-up Honda Civic. She took one look at the laptop and raised an eyebrow. "This belongs to someone you know," she said. It wasn't a question. "Can you get into it?" Sadie pulled a USB drive from her purse and plugged it into the laptop. "Give me 10 minutes. While she worked, Edwin paced around the workshop. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. There had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe Moira had left the laptop in Gabe's truck for some work reason. Maybe she'd forgotten about it when she reported it stolen. "Got it," Sadie said. The desktop was clean and organized, just like Moira kept everything in her life. Edwin clicked on the email application first. Nothing unusual. Work correspondence, newsletters, spam. Then he opened the messaging app. The chat history with Gabriel Vittori went back 8 months. Edwin read the first few messages, his stomach sinking with each line. They started professional, then friendly, then flirtatious. By July, they were explicitly sexual. By August, they were talking about love. Jesus, Edwin whispered. Gets worse, Sadie said, pointing to a folder labeled Financials. Look at this. The folder contained bank statements, tax documents, and what appeared to be business partnership agreements. Edwin's name was on several documents he'd never seen before. Shell companies, offshore accounts, money transfers. They're using your identity, Sadie said. Setting up businesses in your name, moving money around. This is serious fraud, Edwin. Edwin's hands shook as he scrolled through the documents. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been moved through accounts bearing his name and social security number. If the authorities discovered this, he could face federal charges. What do you want to do? Sadie asked. Edwin stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he closed the laptop. I want to install some equipment in Moira's car. 2 days later, Edwin watched from his workshop as Moira left for work. She'd been acting strangely, more affectionate than usual, cooking his favorite meals, talking about taking a family vacation. Classic guilty behavior. The dashcam he'd installed behind her rearview mirror was small and wireless, transmitting video directly to his phone. He'd also placed a GPS tracker under her seat and a voice recorder in her glove compartment. Moira's first stop was the Starbucks on Main Street. Nothing suspicious there. Her second stop was Tri-State Logistics, where she worked as a sales analyst. Edwin expected her to stay there all day. Instead, she left after 2 hours and drove to the Marriott Hotel downtown. Edwin's phone buzzed with a video alert. He opened the app and watched his wife park her car, check her makeup in the mirror, and walk toward the hotel entrance. 3 minutes later, Gabriel Vittori appeared on screen, walking from the opposite direction. They met at the hotel entrance and kissed. Not a friendly peck, but a passionate, desperate kiss that lasted nearly 30 seconds. Edwin set his phone down and walked to the bathroom, where he threw up his breakfast. That evening, Moira came home with flowers and a bottle of wine. I thought we could have a nice dinner, she said, kissing Edwin on the cheek. Just the two of us. Toby's at my sister's until tomorrow. They ate salmon and drank wine while Moira talked about her day at the office. She was animated, happy, glowing in a way Edwin hadn't seen in months. She was glowing because she'd spent the afternoon in bed with another man. You seem different tonight, Edwin said. Different how? Happier, relaxed. Moira smiled and reached across the table to squeeze his hand. I've been thinking about us lately, about our marriage. I want to make more effort. That's good to hear. I love you, Edwin. I hope you know that. Edwin squeezed her hand back. I love you too. It was the last honest thing either of them would say to each other. Over the next week, Edwin documented everything. Moira's trips to the hotel occurred every Tuesday and Thursday, always between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. The voice recorder picked up phone conversations where she and Gabe discussed their exit strategy, liquidating certain assets and transferring others before anyone noticed. Edwin also discovered they were planning to have him committed to a psychiatric facility. He's been acting paranoid lately, Moira said during one recorded phone call. Asking strange questions about my laptop, following me around the house. I think he's having some kind of breakdown. That could work in our favor, Gabe replied. If he's declared mentally incompetent, you could get power of attorney, handle all the business transfers without his signature. Edwin sat in his workshop, listening to his wife plot his destruction, and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He called Sadie. I need to learn some things, he told her. What kind of things? Everything you know about surveillance, evidence collection, and making people disappear. Sadie was quiet for a moment. Edwin, whatever you're planning, they're going to destroy me, Edwin said. Take everything I have, including my son. I won't let that happen. Come over, Sadie said. We'll talk. Sadie's house was small and cluttered, filled with books on criminology and boxes of old case files. She made coffee and sat Edwin down at her kitchen table. Tell me everything, she said. Edwin showed her the laptop evidence, the recorded conversations, the financial documents. Sadie listened without interruption, her expression growing harder with each revelation. You're right, she said finally. They're setting you up for a complete takedown. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I want them to lose everything, Edwin said. Their jobs, their money, their reputations. I want them to know what it feels like to be betrayed by someone they trust. Sadie nodded slowly. That's going to require patience and planning. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Once you start, there's no going back. I'm sure. Then we need to talk about the salvage protocol. The salvage protocol was something Sadie had developed during her years as a private investigator. It was a systematic approach to destroying someone's life while maintaining plausible deniability. The name came from Edwin's profession. When a car was totaled beyond repair, you salvaged what was valuable and scrapped the rest. The key is misdirection, Sadie explained. You don't attack your primary targets directly. You create chaos around them, make them paranoid, turn them against each other. By the time they realize what's happening, it's too late. Over the next 3 days, Sadie taught Edwin everything she knew about digital surveillance, voice recording, photograph manipulation, and identity theft. She showed him how to create untraceable email accounts, purchase burner phones, and establish false identities. The most important rule, she said, is that you can never be directly connected to anything that happens. You're always 3 steps removed from the actual action. Edwin learned quickly. He had a mechanical mind that understood systems and processes. More importantly, he had motivation. The first phase of the plan targeted Rafe Lane, a 33-year-old coworker of Moira's who had a gambling problem and a crypto trading addiction. Rafe was perfect for what Edwin needed, desperate for money and careless with details. Edwin spent 2 weeks studying Rafe's online activities. The man was active on social media, posted frequently about his trading successes and failures, and had a habit of sharing personal information that should have been kept private. Using techniques Sadie had taught him, Edwin created a series of fake cryptocurrency investment opportunities. He designed professional-looking websites, created false testimonials, and even hired actors to make promotional videos. Then, he began targeting Rafe with carefully crafted social media ads and email campaigns. Rafe took the bait immediately. Within a week, he had invested $12,000 in Edwin's fake crypto fund. Edwin let the investment appear to grow for 10 days, then made it vanish overnight. But the real trap was just beginning. Edwin used Rafe's investment information to gain access to his email and banking accounts. From there, he began transferring small amounts of money from various tri-state logistics accounts into Rafe's personal accounts, making it look like Rafe was embezzling from the company. The beauty of the plan was that Moira and Gabe would be forced to investigate the missing money, which would lead them directly to Rafe. They couldn't report it to the police without exposing their own fraud, so they would have to handle it internally. Edwin watched it all unfold through the surveillance equipment he'd installed in Moira's car and office. The arguments between Moira and Gabe grew more heated as the financial discrepancies became harder to explain. They suspected each other of skimming extra money, which created exactly the kind of paranoia Edwin was hoping for. Meanwhile, Edwin began phase 2 of his plan, the psychological warfare. He started leaving subtle signs that he knew about the affair. A hotel receipt accidentally left in Moira's purse. A screenshot of Gabriel Vittori's LinkedIn profile open on the family computer. Questions about Moira's whereabouts that were just specific enough to be unsettling. "How was your meeting with the Johnson account on Tuesday?" he asked one evening, knowing she'd been at the hotel with Gabe. "What meeting?" Moira replied, her voice slightly strained. "The one you mentioned this morning. You said you had to handle some problems with their shipping schedule." "Oh, right. It went fine. Just routine stuff." Edwin nodded and changed the subject, but he could see the worry in Moira's eyes. She was beginning to wonder how much he knew. The pressure was getting to Gabe as well. Edwin's surveillance showed him becoming increasingly agitated at work, snapping at subordinates and making careless mistakes. The man was drinking more, sleeping less, and showing signs of severe stress. Perfect. 3 weeks into the salvage protocol, Edwin decided it was time for a more direct approach. He needed to force Moira and Gabe into making a critical mistake. He began by staging his own mental breakdown. Edwin started acting paranoid and confused around Moira, asking repetitive questions and making nonsensical statements about being watched. He forgot conversations they'd had and became suspicious of routine activities like grocery shopping and bill paying. "I think someone's been in the house," he told Moira one evening, after carefully rearranging items in their bedroom. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Things are moved. My tools in the workshop, papers on my desk. Someone's been going through our stuff." Moira exchanged glances with Toby, who was doing homework at the kitchen table. Edwin caught the look. She was setting up witnesses to his deteriorating mental state. Maybe you just forgot where you put things, she suggested gently. I don't forget, Edwin said, his voice rising slightly. I know where I put everything. Someone's been here. That night, Edwin heard Moira on the phone with someone, speaking in low, urgent tones. The voice recorder in their bedroom picked up every word. It's getting worse, she said. He's becoming paranoid, suspicious. Yesterday, he accused me of moving his tools around. How much worse? Gabe's voice was tense. I think we need to move up our timeline. If he has some kind of complete breakdown before we can get him committed, it could complicate everything. What about the kid? Toby's young. He'll adapt. Kids are resilient. Edwin listened to his wife discuss disposing of him like a broken appliance and felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. The next morning, Edwin called in sick to work and drove to a medical supply store in Pittsburgh. Using a fake ID Sadie had helped him create, he purchased a variety of psychiatric medications, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and sedatives. He didn't plan to take them. He planned to hide them where Moira would find them, making it look like he was self-medicating for a mental illness she didn't know about. Edwin planted the medications in his workshop, his truck, and his home office. He also created a fake medical record showing he'd been treated for paranoid schizophrenia and left it in a file cabinet where Moira often looked for tax documents. 2 days later, Moira found the medications. Edwin, she said, holding a bottle of antipsychotic pills. What are these? Edwin looked up from his newspaper, feigning confusion. What are what? These pills. They were in your toolbox. I don't know what those are, Edwin said. Where did they come from? They're prescription medications for mental illness. Edwin stared at the bottle as if seeing it for the first time. That's not mine. Someone must have put it there. Moira sat down across from him, her expression a mixture of concern and calculation. Edwin, have you been seeing a doctor? Someone I don't know about? No. Why would I see a doctor? Because you've been acting strange lately. Paranoid, confused. These medications are for treating psychosis. Edwin's performance was flawless, confused, defensive, and slightly frightened. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not sick. There's nothing wrong with me. That evening, Edwin listened to Moira's phone call with Gabe. I found psychiatric medications hidden all over the house, she said. He's been self-medicating for God knows how long. That's perfect, Gabe replied. If he's already been treated for mental illness, it'll be much easier to get him committed. Do you have documentation? I'm still looking, but this gives us everything we need to move forward. Good. I've been working on the power of attorney paperwork. Once he's declared incompetent, you can sign off on all the transfers. Edwin smiled in the darkness. They were walking directly into his trap. The following week, Edwin escalated his fake breakdown. He began leaving the house at odd hours, claiming he was checking the perimeter for intruders. He installed motion sensors and security cameras around the property, telling Moira he was protecting the family from unspecified threats. From what? She asked. People who want to hurt us, Edwin said vaguely. They've been watching the house. Moira documented everything, taking photos of Edwin's security equipment and recording videos of his increasingly erratic behavior. She was building a case for his mental incompetence, exactly as Edwin had planned, but Edwin was documenting everything too. He had hidden cameras throughout the house now, recording Moira's phone calls with Gabe, her conversations with her sister about having Edwin taken care of, and her searches through his personal belongings, looking for more evidence of mental illness. On a Thursday evening in late October, Edwin decided it was time for the next phase of his plan. Moira had left for her usual hotel meeting with Gabe. Edwin followed her in a rented truck, staying far enough back to avoid detection. He watched them enter the hotel together, then drove to Gabe's apartment building. Getting into Gabe's apartment was easier than Edwin had expected. The man lived in a trendy downtown complex with poor security and a maintenance staff that didn't ask questions. Edwin dressed in work clothes and carried a toolbox, nodding to the security guard as he walked through the lobby. Gabe's apartment was on the 8th floor, overlooking the river. Edwin picked the lock in less than 2 minutes, another skill Sadie had taught him. The apartment was exactly what Edwin had expected from a man like Gabe. Expensive furniture, expensive electronics, expensive artwork. Everything was chosen to impress, rather than comfort. Edwin planted listening devices in the living room, bedroom, and home office. He also installed a keylogger on Gabe's computer and cloned his hard drive. The entire operation took less than 30 minutes. As Edwin was preparing to leave, he heard voices in the hallway. Gabe and Moira were returning earlier than expected. Edwin grabbed his tools and headed for the balcony. The apartment was 8 floors up, but the building's architecture provided ledges and handholds. Edwin had grown up climbing on industrial equipment and salvage yard machinery. This was just another obstacle to overcome. He climbed down 2 floors to an empty apartment balcony and waited until he heard Gabe's door close. Then he took the elevator down to the lobby and walked calmly to his truck. The listening devices in Gabe's apartment provided exactly the intelligence Edwin needed. Over the next few days, he learned that Moira and Gabe were planning to have him committed within the next 2 weeks. They had already contacted a private psychiatric facility and arranged for Edwin to be picked up on a bogus mental health warrant. More importantly, Edwin learned about their complete financial scheme. They had stolen over $400,000 from Tri-State Logistics, using Edwin's identity to establish shell companies and offshore accounts. They planned to liquidate everything and disappear to Costa Rica, leaving Edwin to face federal fraud charges. Once he's committed, we'll have maybe 6 months before anyone starts asking serious questions about the missing money, Gabe said during one recorded conversation. What about Toby? Moira asked. He'll be fine. Foster care, maybe your sister can take him. Kids adapt. Edwin listened to his wife casually dismiss their son's future and felt something break inside him. These people had to be stopped. It was time for the final phase of the salvage protocol. Edwin spent 3 days preparing for what Sadie called the reveal. He compiled all the evidence he'd collected, financial documents, recorded conversations, surveillance footage, and proof of the affair. He organized it into a comprehensive dossier that told the complete story of Moira and Gabe's betrayal. Then he began distributing copies. Edwin sent anonymous packages to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, the Pennsylvania State Police, and the IRS. He also sent copies to Tri-State Logistics Board of Directors, their major clients, and several local news outlets. But those were just warning shots. The real target was much more personal. On a cold Saturday morning in November, Edwin organized a barbecue at his house. He invited everyone, Moira's family, their neighbors, friends from work, parents from Toby's school. 23 people in total. What's the occasion? Moira asked as she helped set up tables in the backyard. Just felt like bringing people together, Edwin said. We don't socialize enough. The party was pleasant at first. People ate hamburgers and drank beer. Kids played in the yard. Adults caught up on neighborhood gossip. Moira was in her element, playing the perfect hostess, charming everyone with her smile and laughter. Gabe arrived fashionably late, bringing expensive wine and acting like he belonged there. He knew most of the guests from various work functions and community events. He was confident, relaxed, completely unaware of what was about to happen. At 3 p.m., Edwin stood up and called for everyone's attention. I want to thank you all for coming, he said, holding a beer bottle. Moira and I have been married for 12 years, and we've been blessed with wonderful friends and family. People smiled and raised their drinks. Moira beamed at him from across the yard. Marriage is built on trust, Edwin continued, on honesty and commitment. When those things are broken, well, he gestured toward a large projection screen he'd set up next to the house. Sometimes you have to show people the truth. The first image appeared on the screen, a photo of Moira and Gabe kissing outside the Marriott Hotel. The crowd fell silent. This was taken 3 weeks ago, Edwin said conversationally. Tuesday afternoon, while I was at work and my son was at school. Moira's face went white. Edwin, what are you doing? Showing everyone what kind of person I married, he replied. The next image was a bank statement showing the shell companies established in Edwin's name. Then came recorded excerpts of Moira and Gabe's phone conversations, discussing their plans to have Edwin committed and steal his money. Stop this, Gabe said, stepping forward. This is insane. No, Edwin said, clicking to the next slide. This is evidence. The crowd was transfixed. Some people were taking photos with their phones. Others were backing away, uncomfortable with the public humiliation they were witnessing. Moira's sister Jennifer pushed through the crowd. Edwin, this is cruel. Whatever problems you two have, this isn't the way to handle them. Tell me, Jennifer, Edwin said. What would you do if you discovered your husband was not only cheating on you, but also stealing from you and planning to have you locked up in a mental institution? Jennifer's mouth opened and closed without sound. Edwin continued the slideshow. Financial records, hotel receipts, screenshots of text messages, a recording of Moira telling Gabe that Toby would adapt to being placed in foster care. "You're all witnessing the complete destruction of a 12-year marriage," Edwin announced. "My wife and her lover stole $400,000 using my identity. They were planning to have me committed to a psychiatric facility so they could take control of my assets and disappear to Costa Rica." "That's not true," Moira said, but her voice was weak and shaky. "Everything you're seeing is documented evidence," Edwin replied. "Bank records, recorded conversations, surveillance footage. I have copies of everything, and I've already shared them with the appropriate authorities." Gabe lunged forward, grabbing for Edwin's laptop. "You son of a bitch!" Edwin was ready for him. He'd been working with his hands his entire life, and Gabe was soft, out of shape, used to fighting his battles with words and manipulation. Edwin caught Gabe's wrist and twisted, sending him stumbling backward into a folding table. "Don't," Edwin said calmly. "You're already in enough trouble." Gabe scrambled to his feet, his face red with rage and humiliation. He swung a wild punch at Edwin's head. Edwin ducked and drove his fist into Gabe's solar plexus, doubling him over. Then he grabbed a fire poker from beside the barbecue grill and brought it down across Gabe's nose. The sound of breaking cartilage was audible across the backyard. Gabe screamed and fell to his knees, blood streaming down his face. "Jesus Christ, Edwin!" someone shouted. "Call the police!" another voice yelled. Edwin stood over Gabe, still holding the fire poker. "The police are already involved," he said. "Federal agents will be here Monday morning to arrest both of them for fraud and embezzlement." Moira was sobbing now, her perfect facade completely shattered. "Edwin, please, we can work this out. We can fix this." "No," Edwin said, "we can't." The party ended quickly after that. People gathered their belongings and left without saying goodbye, avoiding eye contact with both Edwin and Moira. Within an hour, the backyard was empty, except for scattered plastic cups and abandoned lawn chairs. Gabe had been taken to the hospital by ambulance. His nose was broken in 3 places, and he would need surgery to repair the damage. Moira sat on the back porch, staring at nothing, tears streaming down her face. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you face the consequences of your choices," Edwin replied. That night, Edwin moved his belongings to a motel outside town. He left Moira in the house with instructions to contact a lawyer and prepare for the inevitable federal investigation. He also left her with a final surprise: documents showing that he had legally transferred ownership of the house and salvage yard to a trust controlled by Toby. Even if she avoided prison, she would have nothing left. Over the next week, everything Edwin had predicted came to pass. Federal agents raided Tri-State Logistics and arrested several executives, including Gabe. The company's stock price collapsed. Local news outlets picked up the story, turning Moira and Gabe into symbols of corporate greed and personal betrayal. Moira was fired from her job and found herself unemployable in the logistics industry. Her accounts were frozen by federal investigators, and she was forced to move in with her sister. The woman who had once controlled every aspect of her life was now dependent on others for basic necessities. But Edwin wasn't finished. On a cold December evening, Edwin received a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at the old cabin on Cedar Ridge. Come alone." Edwin recognized the number. It was one of Gabe's burner phones. Somehow the man had made bail and was looking for revenge. The cabin on Cedar Ridge was an abandoned hunting lodge that had been empty for years. Edwin had discovered it during his childhood, exploring the woods around the salvage yard. It was isolated, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that was barely passable in winter. Edwin drove to the cabin as snow began to fall. His truck's headlights illuminated the decrepit building as he pulled up to the front door. Gabe's rental car was already there, parked at an angle that suggested he'd arrived in a hurry. Edwin entered the cabin cautiously. The interior was dark except for the glow of a battery-powered lantern sitting on a dusty table. Gabe stood in the shadows near the far wall, his face still swollen and bandaged from the broken nose. "You destroyed everything," Gabe said. His voice was thick with pain and rage. "You destroyed everything," Edwin replied. "I just made sure everyone knew about it. I lost my job, my reputation. My face is ruined. Do you know what that feels like? Do you know what it feels like to discover that your wife is planning to have you locked up in a mental institution so she can steal your money and abandon your child?" Gabe stepped into the lantern light. He was holding a knife, a large hunting blade that gleamed in the dim illumination. "I'm going to kill you," he said. "Make it look like an accident, a robbery gone wrong." Edwin smiled. "You're not a killer, Gabe. You're a middle manager with delusions of grandeur. You've never been in a real fight in your life." "I'm desperate," Gabe said. Desperate men do desperate things. He lunged forward with the knife. Edwin sidestepped and grabbed Gabe's wrist, twisting until he dropped the weapon. Then Edwin drove his knee into Gabe's ribs, sending him stumbling backward. "The problem with men like you," Edwin said, advancing slowly, "is that you think intelligence is a substitute for strength. You think because you can manipulate people with words and schemes, you're superior to men who work with their hands." Gabe swung wildly. Edwin caught his fist and headbutted him in the face, reopening the wounds from his broken nose. Gabe screamed and fell to his knees. "You want to know what desperation looks like?" Edwin asked, grabbing Gabe by the hair. "Desperation is discovering that the woman you love has been plotting to destroy your life for months. Desperation is realizing that your own child might end up in foster care because of your wife's greed." Edwin dragged Gabe outside into the falling snow. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the wind was picking up. Winter in Pennsylvania could be brutal, especially for someone unprepared. "What are you doing?" Gabe gasped. Edwin began stripping off Gabe's clothes. First his jacket, then his shirt, then his pants and shoes. Within minutes, Gabe was standing in the snow wearing only his underwear. "Teaching you about consequences," Edwin said. He zip-tied Gabe's hands behind his back and secured him to a tree about 50 yards from the cabin. Then he returned to the cabin and retrieved the battery-powered lantern. "Someone will find you," Edwin said, setting the lantern down just out of Gabe's reach. "Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. Depends on how long you can survive in the cold." "You can't leave me here," Gabe said, his teeth already chattering. "I'll die. Maybe. Or maybe you'll find a way to get free and make it back to your car. That's the thing about consequences. They're unpredictable." Edwin walked back to his truck and drove away, leaving Gabe tied to the tree in his underwear. He didn't look back. 3 days later, a park ranger found Gabe unconscious but alive, suffering from severe hypothermia and frostbite. He survived, but lost 3 toes and 2 fingers. The incident was reported as a hunting accident. Gabe claimed he'd gotten lost in the woods and couldn't remember how he'd ended up tied to a tree. Edwin was never questioned about the incident. He had been careful to avoid leaving any evidence that could connect him to Gabe's misfortune. A week after Gabe was found, Edwin staged his own death. He spent an entire day preparing the scene in his workshop, spreading gasoline around the building, positioning a stolen cadaver from a closed funeral home, and setting up a timer-controlled ignition system that would create a massive explosion. The blast was heard for miles. By the time the fire department arrived, the workshop was completely destroyed. The heat had been so intense that the body was burned beyond recognition. Edwin's truck was found in the wreckage, along with his wallet, wedding ring, and several personal items. The investigation concluded that Edwin Halperin had died in an accidental explosion while working on a propane tank. His body was cremated and buried in the town's cemetery. Moira attended the funeral, crying convincingly for the cameras. But Edwin was already across the Canadian border, traveling under the identity of a long-haul trucker named William Cross. He had spent months preparing the false identity, using techniques Sadie had taught him, and resources he'd accumulated during his salvage business. Edwin drove north through Ontario and Quebec, finally stopping in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The city was cold and gray, full of working-class people who minded their own business. It was the perfect place to disappear. He found work at a shipping company, loading and unloading cargo containers. The job was honest, anonymous, and paid in cash. He rented a small apartment near the harbor and settled into a quiet, solitary life. 6 months after his supposed death, Edwin received a package at his new address. It contained newspaper clippings about Moira's trial and conviction for federal fraud charges. She had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Gabe had received 12 years for his role as the primary architect of the scheme. The package also contained a note from Sadie. "Thought you'd want to know how it ended. The boy is safe with good people. You did what you had to do." Toby was living with Moira's sister Jennifer and her husband in Ohio. Edwin had made sure the boy would be financially secure. The trust fund he'd established would cover college tuition and living expenses until Toby turned 25. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than foster care. Edwin kept the newspaper clippings in a drawer beside his bed. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would read them and remember the satisfaction he'd felt watching Moira's perfect world collapse around her. The woman who had plotted his destruction was now wearing an orange jumpsuit and sharing a cell with strangers. The revenge had been complete and surgical. Edwin had destroyed their lives without technically breaking any laws himself. The fraud charges were legitimate. Moira and Gabe had actually stolen the money. The evidence Edwin had gathered was authentic. Even Gabe's incident at the cabin could be explained as a hunting accident or personal misadventure. Edwin's only regret was leaving Toby behind, but he knew that staying would have meant prison or death. His son would grow up believing his father had died in an accident, which was better than knowing the truth about what his mother had done. 1 year after his supposed death, Edwin was working the night shift at the Halifax shipping yard when he noticed a familiar face among the new arrivals. Rafe Lane, Moira's former co-worker, was standing in line with other job applicants. Edwin pulled his baseball cap low and avoided eye contact, but he watched Rafe throughout the evening. The man looked broken, thin, nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder. The crypto trading addiction had destroyed his life just as Edwin had planned. During a smoke break, Edwin overheard Rafe talking to another worker. "I used to work in logistics," Rafe said. "Good money, nice office. Then I got mixed up in some bad investments and everything went to hell." "What kind of investments?" the other man asked. "Cryptocurrency. Lost everything I had, plus money that wasn't mine. Had to leave the country to avoid prosecution." Edwin smiled in the darkness. Rafe would never know that his downfall had been orchestrated by a man he'd barely noticed at the office. The beauty of the salvage protocol was that the targets never understood what had really happened to them. As winter turned to spring, Edwin settled into his new life. He worked steady hours, paid his bills, and kept to himself. The harbor was peaceful in the early morning hours, with seagulls calling overhead and the smell of salt water in the air. Sometimes Edwin thought about returning to Pennsylvania to see Toby, but he always decided against it. The boy was better off without him. Edwin had become something cold and calculating, capable of destroying lives without remorse. That wasn't the kind of father Toby deserved. On a warm evening in May, Edwin was walking home from work when he spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench near the harbor. Aunt Sadie was wearing a tourist outfit and reading a guidebook, but Edwin recognized her immediately. He sat down beside her without saying hello. "Nice city," Sadie said, not looking up from her guidebook. "Quiet," Edwin replied. "The boy is doing well. Honor roll last semester. Plays baseball like his father. That's good. Jennifer sends pictures sometimes. He's growing up fast." Edwin stared out at the water. A container ship was coming into port, its lights reflecting off the dark waves. "Any regrets?" Sadie asked. Edwin considered the question. He thought about Moira sitting in a prison cell, about Gabe struggling to button his shirt with damaged fingers, about Toby growing up without either of his parents. He thought about the life he'd given up and the man he'd become. "No," he said finally. "They made their choices. I just made sure they faced the consequences." Sadie closed her guidebook and stood up. "Take care of yourself, Edwin." "You too, Aunt Sadie." She walked away without looking back, disappearing into the crowd of evening tourists. Edwin sat on the bench for another hour, watching ships come and go in the harbor. 3 years later, Edwin was promoted to shift supervisor at the shipping company. He had proven himself to be reliable, intelligent, and completely uninterested in office politics. His coworkers respected him, but didn't really know him, which was exactly how he preferred it. On his 4th anniversary in Halifax, Edwin received an unexpected phone call at work. The caller ID showed a Pennsylvania area code. "Is this William Cross?" a young man's voice asked. "Who's asking?" "My name is Toby Halperin. I think you might have known my father." Edwin's hand tightened on the phone. "I'm sorry, kid. I don't know anyone by that name." "Please don't hang up," Toby said quickly. "I've been looking for you for 2 years. I know who you really are." Edwin walked outside the shipping office, making sure no one could overhear the conversation. "What do you want?" "I want to meet you. I want to understand what really happened to my family. Your father died in an accident. Your mother is in prison for fraud. There's nothing else to understand." "That's not true," Toby said. His voice was older now, more mature, but Edwin could still hear the 11-year-old boy he remembered. "I found things hidden in the old workshop, evidence that my father collected before he died." Edwin felt a chill run down his spine. He had been so careful to destroy everything before staging his death. What could Toby have possibly found? "I know you're alive," Toby continued. "I know you planned everything. The question is whether you're going to keep running, or whether you're going to explain to your son why you abandoned him." Edwin closed his eyes. The careful, anonymous life he'd built in Halifax suddenly felt fragile and temporary. "Where are you now?" he asked. "Standing outside your apartment building." Edwin turned around and saw a young man across the street holding a cell phone. He was tall and lean, with Edwin's dark hair and Moira's sharp features. He looked like the kind of person who didn't give up easily. "How did you find me?" "Aunt Sadie helped. She said it was time." Edwin ended the call and walked across the street. Up close, Toby looked older than his 15 years. He had the serious, calculating expression of someone who had learned too much about the world too early. "Hello, Dad," Toby said. "Hello, son." They stood looking at each other for a long moment. Then Toby pulled a manila envelope from his backpack. "I found these hidden in a false bottom of your old toolbox," he said. "Photos, documents, recordings, everything you collected about Mom and that man." Edwin took the envelope but didn't open it. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know if it was worth it," Toby said. "Destroying our family? Abandoning me? Was your revenge worth losing everything?" Edwin looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw something he recognized. The same cold intelligence that had driven Edwin to plan and execute the salvage protocol. The same capacity for patient, methodical thinking that had made Edwin so effective at destroying his enemies. "Your mother was going to have me committed to a mental institution," Edwin said quietly. "She was going to steal everything we owned and leave you in foster care so she could run away with her lover. They didn't just betray me, they betrayed you too." "I know," Toby said. "I figured that out years ago. But you had other options. You could have exposed them without disappearing. You could have fought for custody. You chose revenge instead." Edwin nodded slowly. "Yes, I did." "Why?" "Because some betrayals are so complete that mercy becomes complicity. Your mother didn't just cheat on me. She tried to destroy my mind, my freedom, and my relationship with you. She deserved everything that happened to her." Toby was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he asked, "What about me? What did I deserve?" It was the question Edwin had been avoiding for 4 years, the question that haunted his quiet nights in Halifax. "You deserve better parents than either of us," Edwin said finally. "Better than a mother who would sacrifice her own child for money, and better than a father who chose revenge over responsibility." "So why did you choose revenge?" Edwin looked out at the harbor, where another container ship was approaching the dock. The same routine day after day, predictable and safe. "Because I couldn't let them win," he said. "Because if I'd tried to fight them through the legal system, they would have destroyed me first. They had money, lawyers, and a plan. I had only one advantage. They didn't know I knew about their scheme. And now? Now they're in prison. You're safe with people who love you. And I'm loading cargo ships in Nova Scotia. Everyone got what they deserved." Toby shook his head. "You're wrong about one thing. I wasn't safe. I spent 4 years thinking my father was dead, wondering if I had inherited some kind of mental illness that would make me dangerous to the people around me. Do you know what that feels like?" Edwin felt something crack inside his chest. He had been so focused on punishing Moira and Gabe that he hadn't fully considered the psychological damage his fake death would cause his son. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought it would be easier for you if you believed I was dead." It wasn't easier. It was devastating. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching the evening traffic pass by on the street. "What happens now?" Edwin asked. "That depends on you," Toby said. "I graduate high school next year. I've been accepted to Penn State for engineering. I could use a father who's actually alive to see me graduate." Edwin studied his son's face. The boy had grown up without him, had figured out the truth on his own, and had tracked him down across international borders. He was smart, determined, and apparently capable of forgiveness. "It would be complicated," Edwin said. "I'm legally dead. Coming back would mean questions, investigations, possible criminal charges. Aunt Sadie says there are ways around that. New identities, witness protection programs. She knows people." Of course she did. Sadie had probably been planning this reunion from the beginning, waiting for the right moment to guide Toby to Halifax. Edwin looked at the envelope in his hands, then handed it back to his son. "Keep these. Someday you might need to understand exactly what kind of people your mother and Gabe really were. Does that mean you'll come back?" Edwin thought about his quiet life in Halifax, his anonymous job at the shipping yard, his small apartment overlooking the harbor. It was peaceful, but it was also empty. He had achieved his revenge, but the cost had been everything that actually mattered. "Let me think about it," he said. Toby nodded. "I'm staying at a hotel downtown for 3 days. Room 247 at the Maritime Inn. If you decide you want to be my father again, you know where to find me." He turned and walked away, leaving Edwin standing alone on the sidewalk. For the next 2 days, Edwin went through the motions of his normal routine: work, sleep, meals, solitude. But his mind was elsewhere, weighing options and calculating risks. On the third day, Edwin made his decision. He walked into the Maritime Inn and took the elevator to the second floor. Room 247 was at the end of the hallway. Edwin knocked twice. Toby opened the door, already dressed and packed as if he'd been expecting this moment. "Ready to go home?" Edwin asked. "Are you?" Edwin thought about the question seriously. Home meant Pennsylvania, accountability, the possibility of prosecution for his faked death and the evidence he'd manipulated. It meant rebuilding a relationship with a son who had every reason to hate him. It meant giving up the safe, anonymous life he'd built in Halifax. But it also meant the chance to be present for his son's graduation, to help him through college, to be the father Toby deserved instead of the ghost Edwin had become. "Yes," Edwin said. "I'm ready." Toby smiled, the first genuine smile Edwin had seen from him since their reunion. "Aunt Sadie is waiting in the lobby," Toby said. "She's got everything figured out. New documents, a cover story, contacts with federal authorities who are willing to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Testimony against some of Gabe's associates who are still operating fraud schemes. Immunity for your fake death in exchange for cooperation." Edwin shook his head. Even from beyond the grave, he was still playing the system to his advantage. "Let's go," he said. They rode the elevator down to the lobby, where Sadie was waiting with a briefcase full of documents and a plan that would bring Edwin Halperin back from the dead. As they walked out of the hotel together, Edwin realized that the salvage protocol was finally complete. He had destroyed his enemies, protected his son, and found a way back to the life he thought he'd lost forever. The revenge had taken 4 years to fully execute, but it had been worth every calculated move. 6 months later, Edwin stood in the audience at Toby's high school graduation, watching his son walk across the stage to receive his diploma. The federal deal had worked exactly as Sadie had promised. Edwin's cooperation had helped convict 3 more members of Gabe's financial fraud network, and in exchange, all charges related to his faked death had been dropped. He was officially alive again, working as a consultant for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and rebuilding his relationship with his son one conversation at a time. Moira was still in prison and would remain there for 3 more years. Gabe had been released early for good behavior, but was working as a night janitor and living in a halfway house. His reputation in the business world was destroyed forever. As Toby's name was called, and he crossed the graduation stage, Edwin felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine happiness that wasn't connected to someone else's destruction. The salvage protocol had taught him that revenge was a dish best served systematically, with patience and precision. But sitting in that auditorium, watching his son graduate, Edwin learned something more important. Some things were worth more than revenge. Some things were worth coming back from the dead for. After the ceremony, Toby found Edwin in the parking lot. "So what now?" Toby asked. Edwin looked at his son, tall, intelligent, with his whole life ahead of him, and smiled. "Now we go home," Edwin said, "and we figure out how to be a family again." As they drove away from the school together, Edwin glanced in his rearview mirror one last time. The past was finally behind them, and the future was whatever they chose to make it. The salvage was complete.